This Halloween, while I was busy getting drunk and fighting people on the streets of Osaka dressed as a maid, Guillermo Del Toro was busy showing the world his cock. That is his COC, Cabinet of Curiosity. A new horror anthology series curated by the man behind the dark tales of Pan's Labyrinth, Mimic, Hellboy, and Kung Fu Panda 3? Wait, really? EP counts. Now, I love me a good anthology, and the dark ones at that. Black Mirror and Love, Death and Robots are some of my favorite, to name a few. The horror, especially of the Lovecraftian kind, really get me going, but it's hard to get things right. So does the COC deliver on its promises of a modern gothic horror Twilight Zone? Let's find out. Lot 36 gets off to a strong start. A creepy old man is cutting the heads off of various animals before succumbing to a fatal case of bending over, leaving behind a storage locker which is auctioned off, and we are introduced to down on his luck, everyman single father just trying to make it in the world, Nick.
I just want my kids back.
Haha, just kidding, he's a racist. And the show is not afraid of letting you know this.
But what about white rights? No, we can't talk about that.
No, we can't. Am I allowed to say black anger? I didn't think so.
Which means that we don't need to feel bad if something nasty happens to him, which it will. Now, I love the setup to this episode. Creepy intro, good concept for horror with a modern Storage Wars theme is a great vehicle to tell a spooky story. Anything could be in that locker, but realistically it's going to be some of that old Simpsons merch that somebody thought would be valuable one day.
Oh, some Bart Simpson dolls.
Eat my shorts.
Okay. Shorts.
Nick begins to eBay the old Nazi men stuff off when he finds a creepy table, and is also confronted by a slightly less than allowed immigrant whose storage locker was sold by a mistake. He is mean to her, which will be important later.
Clearly you don't speak English, so make an effort when you're in my country and try and insult me in my own language.
I said I hope you rot in hell.
The table contains 3 old occult books, which are really cool. I really like the details of the props in this show, but one is missing, the 4th and most valuable book. Nick needs cash fast, or he's going to be buried by a loan shark, and learning that the full set of the books is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, he and spooky Germanman head back to find the last book. Inside, they find a secret passage and discover the body of old Naziman's sister, now inhabited by a demon and bound to a spell circle. And this is where the first episode really fell apart for me. Despite seeing the body of a demon with undulating tentacles where an award-winning smile should have been, Nick brazenly dismisses what he sees and then breaks the barrier binding the demon. Now I think that even the most racist of rednecks would not do this, but he does, and now the demon is hungry. Of course, since he is a racist, it's time for him to die. And he is trapped inside with Squid Games because he was mean to nice immigrant earlier in the episode. A simple lesson about why you should be nice to people, or else. Except it's kind of contrived because for this payoff to work, the lady would have had to been standing around at the storage all day hoping for some opportunity like this to occur. Doesn't she have like a job or something to be at? I guess not. That's probably why she couldn't afford her locker in the first place. Anyway, all over, I enjoyed this episode, but I think that it fell flat in the last few minutes. The ramp up from creepy to supernatural was a bit too fast, and the main character didn't act how I'd expect a man to when confronted from something usually only seen from my favorite Japanese cartoons. I'd give it a 3.6 Rogers.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
Each episode of The Cock starts with a short introduction by Del Toro himself, and I enjoy these. They give you a hint and a tease of what's to come, and this one piqued my interest with a very Cthulhian idol sitting inside the cabinet. And the episode begins in a cemetery with a nice little twist to introduce us to our protagonist.
The name's Masson.
A man down on his luck that has to get cash fast to pay back his loan shark. Hey, wait a minute, that's the same as the last episode. Except this time it's different. Masson is a lovable non-racist man.
I am the steward of this garden of remembrance from which you've so brazenly thieved.
Also, I remember him fondly from Stargate.
Is there lemon on the chicken? It's lemon chicken.
We're stupid and don't know no better.
Masson is a grave robber himself, but he has a problem. The rats are feeding on the corpses and taking away his meal ticket. He hates these rats, but he is really one himself, as he too is feeding on the corpses. Hey, I see what you guys are doing here. Again, I have to say that the sets, props, and costumes are great in this show, far above what I'd expect from a TV show. Masson learns that a particularly rich man will be interned that evening, and he only needs to reach it before the rats do. Unfortunately, those cheeky little fellas take his whole body into the tunnels, giving Masson the choice of being buried alive or venturing into a tight, dirty hole. The claustrophobia this causes, I'm told, is where most of the horror comes from in this episode. If you also have claustrophobia, then you might find this the scariest one of the bunch. However, as I'm no stranger to tight, dirty holes, it didn't really bother me very much. In fact, I almost viewed this as a humorous tragedy of errors. While in the tunnels, Masson confronts a giant blind boss rat who hunts him through the tunnels, and the monster work here is good. Even though Del Toro is only attached to this one as a curator, it was the level I'd expect from a project he's involved with. Masson escapes from the giant rat encounter and arrives in the black church that was mentioned earlier, an ancient subterranean altar to the unspeakable. And this is really the highlight of the episode with its promised Cthulhian statue and a second monster. I like this one a lot more than the rat, but it's always a bit predictable when a full bodysuit starts coming alive. Mine. In the final moments of the episode, Masson's worst fears come to pass. Overall, I like this episode, but I didn't find it at all scary or particularly surprising. I would rate this close to the first episode as I enjoyed both of their setups, but felt that the ending didn't quite deliver as much. The Autopsy. Now, this episode begins with a most promising opening with a tease from Del Toro about the horrors of alien life. We first see a spider and then focus on a starry night sky, which morphs into the walls of a coal mine where the scene begins. A very creepy but cinematically perfect way to start before a mysterious stranger throws what is quite clearly an alien device that detonates to cause a cave-in the mine and kill all of those surrounding. We then jump to our main character, an elderly forensic pathologist called Carl Winters, sent to investigate the bodies, meeting his old friend the police chief Nate, who recounts a series of mysterious deaths in the county believed to have been the work of one Joe Allen, who we saw at the beginning of the episode. However, this is no ordinary murder. The bodies have been carved up and there is no trace of blood to be found. We follow the police chief's story as he follows the murders, eventually bringing him to the mine and confronting Joe Allen, and then replaying the events of the first scene. Caught up with the events, Nate takes Carl to a meat storage which has been converted to a makeshift autopsy room to examine the bodies, and this is where the episode really kicks into gear. If you've ever been a fan of the X-Files, you'd be right at home in this episode as Carl begins to dissect the bodies and piece together the events of the explosion. And these are some gruesome scenes as he chops through bones and cuts into organs that might not be for everyone. But I couldn't look away as these body dummies are some of the most convincing that I've ever seen on a screen. But it won't be for everyone. As the night goes on, Carl begins to have his fears, his inner monologue encouraging him to run, but not knowing why.
Run. Get out. Now. Run from what?
As he works his way through the bodies, he learns that those who died near Ellen have a strange hole leading to their chest cavities and are now totally drained of blood. Finally, he prepares to examine the last body, that of Joe Allen, and I was ready for an alien autopsy that I felt I was promised to me by this episode. However, this is where the twist occurs, as whatever body snatcher that was inside Ellen is not dead yet and awakens to confront Carl and drops some exposition. Now, at this point, I was slightly disappointed. As with the first two episodes, I thought they started off very well, but escalated too quickly with the horror and didn't really stick the landing while being entertaining. While I thought that episode 3 would continue on this trend, I couldn't have been more wrong.
We're stupid and don't know no better.
As what follows was a performance unexpected and possibly my favorite in the season. Carl is now bound to the table as Alan explains how he will possess him as a new host, while dissecting his human shell to free the alien parasite inside. This scene can be a little bit hard to watch without covering your eyes at some points, as Carl derives a way to prevent his body from being the tool for the alien to cause harm to others and prevent his chief police friend from being the creature's first meal. I loved almost everything from this one. An almost perfect short horror tale that made the most of the anthology format. Can only hope that the next episode follows in its footsteps. Not following at all in the footsteps of the previous episode, it's time for a comedy horror episode. What? But you know what? I had a smile on my face almost the entire time, and if you are feeling queasy from the events of the autopsy, then The Outside is the pickup that you need. We are introduced to Ugly Duckling Stacy, a quirky woman who likes chicken wings and duck skin. That's right, she's into taxidermy. As a rule of a horror show, someone who has this hobby will either be skinning someone or end up skin themselves before the credits. You know this is coming, and the only question is who it's gonna be. Stacy works at a bank, and her co-workers are the cool, sexy girls.
She always looks at my tits. I don't mind. I mean, I have great tits.
You do.
I mean, you really do. They're amazing. They're perky.
Who you just know that spend their evenings watching reruns of Sex and the City while doing the tour of Franzia.
Suck it! Suck it through our plastic spigot.
Quirky Uggo is invited to the party with the other ladies, and this is her chance to fit in. Despite her beer brand beer drinking and poker tips for ordinary people book reading policeman husband reassurances that she is perfect in every way. She's beautiful on the inside after all.
You walked into a room, made friends with me, didn't you? I thought you hated those women.
hated. What are you talking about? And I'm just dying to see the inside of her beautiful skin and...
The gals each give each other a bottle of
Hollow Glow. We all just want to be good looking.
It's a not-so-secret Santa event. Unfortunately, Stacy didn't realize this and brought one of her taxidermied treasures.
Oh, you can love him forever.
It's okay. Okay.
This is awkward, and we need something to diffuse the situation.
How about that glow, ladies? I mean, come on.
Well, that's better. Unfortunately, it turns out that Stacy is allergic to Miracle Cream and has to leave early.
It hurts when it works.
There is something just so amazing in the dialogue of this episode that had me laughing almost every other moment. There is no subtlety whatsoever. Everyone just says what is happening, and there is no conversation that is more than skin deep.
Nice.
You're gonna stop this nonsense right now.
And it's all great. Honestly, this is almost my favorite episode and one of the funniest things I've seen in a good while. Anyway, Stacy makes a deal with Aloe Glow TV Man to trade her inner beauty for outer beauty and transform into a beautiful swan, but such a transformation is not without its cost.
Starting at just $199.99.
Officer Husband tries to bring Stacy back from the edge, but she wants a seat at the table, which means that anyone in her way needs to be dealt with.
What the fuck, Stace? You stabbed me in the face.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
Well, I guess that answers the who's getting skinned question. And speaking of skin, the Aloe Glow has worked. So Stacy has a new skin of her own. It really did as advertised on the bottle. Everything worked out for everyone, except Officer Husband. Or perhaps the ending is all a delusion of Stacy's, as that was actually one of the advertised side effects. A nice little detail there.
Call the number on your screen now.
Side effects this is crazy.
Hallucinations, lack of independent thought and opinion, but it's all worth it.
But I guess that's up for you to decide. All I know is that this episode was great. 2 in a row, and this is getting good. Now, when I looked up the names for each episode, Pickman's model was one of the ones I was most curious about.
Nice.
Terrible.
As this is a short story by my favorite author, H.P. Lovecraft, and one of my favorite stories as a whole, so I was hyped. Taking place in Arkham, Massachusetts, we follow up-and-coming artist William Turber as he attends art classes at Miskatonic University. The eponymous Pickman joins the class, however, something isn't quite right. Pickman is indeed a talented artist, but his works are utterly macabre, and he has a penchant for drawing things that he finds in cemeteries in the dead of night. Will cannot help but be fascinated by the works, all the same, and befriends Pickman. He is a dark man with a haunted past, which is the inspiration for his works, and he has fallen on some hard times since decking Biff on prom night.
Hey you, get your damn hands off. Oh.
Pickman invites Will to see his private collection in his residence and shows him a scene so gruesome that Will begins to see dark images everywhere. This episode has some amazing performances, props, details, and I was with it up until about this point. I thought it might take the #1 spot. However, this is where I found it started to decline. And I might be in the minority in this opinion, as I've heard from people that this was their favorite and best true horror episode. What follows is that Will tries to remove himself from the encounters with Pickman, who now begins to pursue him, kind of becoming an antagonist of the episode. And this is a major departure from the original story, which may be why I didn't like these events. Will has been deeply affected by the viewing, and it costs him almost everything, but Pickman mysteriously disappears and life goes on. And then we jump forward in time. Will is now married with a son and is a well-to-do society man. Seemingly, he has it all. Nothing could go wrong now, until Pickman sends a painting to the residence, which is where everything goes wrong. The painting does a good job of awakening the darkness Will once saw, and also foreshadowing the end of this episode, but before he can remove the painting from his residence, his young son takes a quick peek, which spreads the darkness to him as well. Will is further troubled by the increasing frequency he is seeing hallucinations induced by the painting, and then learns that one of his colleagues plans to exhibit a collection of Pickman's works, which could have disaster effects on the public. Pickman also shows up at his residence, further vexing Will by putting his family at risk. Will threatens Pickman to leave his family alone, and Pickman claims that he merely values Will's friendship and judgment, but this didn't ring true to me. And don't get me wrong here, the performances are very convincing and enjoyable, but I just could only see Pickman as a villain here instead of a lonely unfortunate victim as he's portrayed in Lovecraft's original. Will makes a deal to view Pickman's private collection should Pickman stay away for good, enacting for the greater good. Will decides that the world must never see the collection, burning the images, and, after a heated exchange, shooting Pickman. And in a terrible moment of revelation, Will understands that Pickman was only doing exactly as suggested back in Miskatonic University.
Draw what you see.
The paintings don't come from my head. They come from my wife.
the majority of his works, family portraits. It is a fairly predictable ending when Pickman returns home to find the influence of the paintings were too much and his family will be forever changed for the worse.
Not a good time to lose one's head.
Oh, indeed.
You'll never be the head of a major corporation.
Okay, that'll do.
Okay.
Now, as I mentioned, I did not really find this episode very satisfying. While a great adaptation in the early parts and with some really good horror imagery and effects, I believe a more faithful retelling of Pickman's, where he is more of a victim than a villain, hiding the truth from Will, who will ultimately discover through an accident, is a much better example of horror storytelling. If you have not read the short story, I absolutely recommend that you do. And while I find myself disappointed in the episode itself, I'm happy to see that more Lovecraftian works are being told. And speaking of which, Episode 6, Dreams in the Witch's House. Another Lovecraft story, although I don't count this one among one of his best works, and this adaptation is a complete departure from the text with only the names of the major characters remaining the same. The story begins with a set of twins as children. The sister is on her deathbed as her brother tries to console her as she passes on. And this is my first issue with the episode, as both of these children are soulless gingers.
A ghost.
This should not be possible. Alright, that's better. Jumping forward in time, we meet
Ronald Weasley. It's Leviosa.
Who is now a man in his autumn years, who has spent almost every moment of his life trying to prove the existence of the supernatural with the ultimate aim of rescuing his sister's soul. Unfortunately, after a lifetime of frauds, his companion has decided to abandon this spiritual quest to pursue money like some sort of filthy capitalist pig.
So money trumps honor. That's not fair.
Fortunately, while working as a barman, he overhears a story about a magical forest from another dimension. Well, that's convenient.
What do you mean, another dimension?
Call it the Forest of Lost Souls.
You take me?
Come and meet the rest of the damned. Did I mention they're lost souls?
Well, actually you did.
Following this mysterious stranger into Snape's potion dungeon, Weasley learns of liquid gold, a potion that lets you meet the rest of the
lost souls.
It's made from cactuses, by the way.
You extract it from a cactus flower.
So you know it's good. He meets his sister there, and now he knows for a fact that it's all real, and not some crazy drug-fueled delusion for comparison. Weasley learns of the witch Keziah Mason, who claimed to have the Elder Wand. I mean the Dimensional Dagger or something, which allows you to cross worlds. So he Airbnbs a night in the witch's house, and the witch shows up. And I'll be fair here, the witch's costume is pretty cool, very spooky and well done. Honestly, this story has a lot to be desired. Weasley takes more drugs in the house and returns to the forest, but the witch sneaks in after him, which I guess was her plan all along because he is a twin. She can somehow use this to bring herself and a man-faced rat back to the world of the living.
What?
Stop it, Rod. Stop. Oh.
The witch then tries to kill Weasley to accomplish this, but she's no match for the power of friendship and is banished to the Shadow Realm. It's an almost bittersweet ending, except that Ratman uses this opportunity to jump out of Ron's chest, killing him.
What I've done cannot be undone!
And then jumping back in the chest and possessing him.
What?
There are a lot of elements here that are indeed in the original Witch's House story, but as a whole I found it a jumbled mess, which I think will just confuse people. Dreams in the Witch's House was my least favorite episode, by a wide margin, and I don't think it was a very good story, but it was nice to see.
Ronald Weasley.
The penultimate episode is sure to be a divisive one. I can easily see this either being at the top or the bottom of other people's lists, and I wouldn't call it horror, but what I would call it is Kino. All style, this episode is an 80s drug-fueled fever dream, and the soundtrack absolutely slaps.
Your host would prefer if you remain silent during the remainder of the ride and listen to the audio program.
Shot on what I can only imagine is the widest of anamorphic lenses that they could find, lens flares are practically trying to escape the border of every scene. This is a most unique episode, and as I've said, there isn't much to a horror story here. Summing up the viewing, it just has to be viewed. It's an experience. To make a long story short, 4 characters, each experts in their own field, are summoned to a drug-fueled party and conversation evening with an eccentric billionaire. They have a really interesting conversation, then get killed by a rock. And that's not a bad thing. I love this episode for just being so different, and I'll say it again, it's Kino. This one might actually have the best replayability for me, and it is really quite a feat how they managed to have 6 characters in the conversation and all have them distinctly different and interesting in their own ways. I can't say too much about this episode because you'll just either love it or hate it, but I won't convince you of either. Watch it and let me know what you think. I give it a thumbs up and I want to see more. Not quite the horror I came for, but
a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one.
Oh, and it's got some magpie sounds in there too. That's kind of neat.
I like this music.
Typical.
The Murmuring. The last episode of the season, like the first, is based on a short story by Del Toro. While the first episode fell apart a bit towards the end, this episode certainly didn't. In fact, this might be the best true horror story of this season. It felt like a full movie, even at just the length of 64 minutes. It's complete, haunting, and satisfying. The story begins with a husband and wife, Nancy and Edgar Bradley, ornithologists that study the murmuring phenomenon of birds and the habits of the Dunlin. They are taking a not-so-romantic trip to a small haunted house to study the Dunlin birds and then confront the real horror of this episode, the dead bedroom.
Edgar, don't. I'm not in the mood.
Never in the mood.
Don't touch me.
Why not?
What's the point?
Just kidding, there's ghosts. But this story felt very similar to a traditional haunted house story, something you might see on, say, Bly Manor. The Bradleys, having lost their own child, are unknowingly staying in one that had a mother who drowned hers, both of whom are now restless spirits that only Nancy can see or communicate with. For actual creepiness, I found this episode to be the scariest by far, not including the body horror of the Autopsy episode. This is a good to honest, by-the-numbers ghost story, which has a satisfying conclusion and is a great end to the first season. Honestly, I'm glad they ended on this one. It really left me wanting more. If I had to rank each of the episodes, I would say that the Autopsy was my favorite, and if I could recommend only one, it would be that. Murmuring is in second place with the best complete story. Third and fourth place would be a toss-up between The Viewing and
Hollow Glow.
But these should maybe be on their own side list because even though I loved every second of them, I didn't think of them as actual horror. At fifth, I would place Graveyard Rats narrowly in front of Lot 66, which I would call decent episodes. At seventh, I would place Pickman's Model, and in dead last, Dreams of the Witch's House. It's really disappointing personally that the two Lovecraft stories are the only two that I would consider actual bad episodes out of the bunch. Anthologies with different directors are always a mixed bag, and you never know what you're going to get in life after all, but these are the only two that I would skip on a rewatch. I wonder how different my picks are to people who haven't read any of the Lovecraft stories. So let me know if you agree with what was your favorite in the comments, and subscribe for future reviews. And until next time.
We're stupid and don't know no better.
Yeah.